Um, Ruach D'vorah Grenn is a Kohenet priestess ordained in the Mashpi'ah and Yoreshet lineage. Hopefully, I'm not mangling that.
It's fine.
Holder of a female Kabbalistic tradition. She founded the Lilith Institute in 1999, co-directed the Women's Spirituality MA program at Sofia University, and has taught at Ner Shalom, Hebrew College, Aquarian Minyan, Napa Valley College, and now is faculty with Yerusha Academy and co-teaches Tree of Life with Rabbi Nadya Gross. They recently co-produced a symposium on the wisdom of mothers, celebrating matriarchal and matrilineal spiritual traditions. D'Vorah was also a founding theorist of the Hebrew priestess movement and on Kohenet Institute's founding advisory board. I'm just going to take a second and let somebody in. Her publications include For She is a Tree of Life, Shared Roots Connecting Women to Deity, and her dissertation on beliefs and rituals among U.S. and South African Lemba women of Jewish ancestry, and also Lilith's Fire. She also edited Talking to Goddess, an anthology of writings from 72 women in 25 traditions. We are so thrilled that Ruach D'vorah is with us tonight, and I want to give her the whole rest of the time until the very end. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you for the invitation. It's very exciting to be here and part of this night. I want to share my screen, but of course, I'm worried that I won't see anybody, but I don't think there's a way around that, right? Because I'll go full screen. So
you get one or the other.
yeah, okay. All right, and you're letting people in. Okay, so I will just, can you see that purple screen? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
All right, let me just move that over and go full screen, but now it's not letting me do that. Nope. Okay, so
If you go to view, you should be able to do
I
it.
know, but can you still see it?
I see it fine. So I
Play
don't know
from
what it is.
start will work. On the far left.
Sorry.
Play from start.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. I have to get out and just.
No, you're at the far left, just under home.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
But I'm not. Oh, I'm getting full screen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So the first thing I want to do is give thanks and praise to our ancestors, those on whose shoulders we stand, both those in our bloodline, our affinity ancestors, those who influence us, and our ancient foremothers, whose spirits, ideas, or actions were often banned by a patriarchal, misogynistic culture. And I'm going to just set my timer so that I have some hope of not running terribly over and maybe having time to get the drumming in. So again, my thanks to you, Barbara, and to Reb Werwin for this invitation and for this really critical and timely topic. I already appreciate all the knowledge, experience, and wisdom that's being shared and will be shared tonight. So first, a bit of an overview and several observations that just kept bubbling up this week, and I wasn't able to ignore them. First of all, those trying to ban books, curricula, our very identities and activities may not realize that what is banned often comes back stronger, as you know, in the same way that taboos can become very attractive temptations, to wit, Garden of Eden. Televangelist and conservative Baptist pastor Jerry Falwell called the women sponsoring the Lilith Fair Music Festival some years ago witches and banned attendance for his followers. The fair ultimately had an estimated 2 million attendees and raised $10 million for groups in domestic violence work and other causes. There are numerous attempts throughout the last 4,000 years, both in Jewish and other religious texts, to erase women's presence through not naming them at all. For example, Lot's wife, not giving Sarah voice in Abraham's decision to sacrifice Isaac, saying that God gave only man the right to control women and nature, or so many imply from the text. I believe there's a negative generational impact on traditional Orthodox women and girls being essentially banned from certain public spaces, and often from reading Torah on the bima, though this is not law, but minhag, it's a custom. Orthodox women and girls are also excluded from a full worship experience, such as through a mechitza, a separation in the synagogue that sets them apart either way above in a balcony or behind a wall where they may not have any vision or very little vision of what's happening, and also not be able to hear sermon and music. And at the kotel, where bans against women bringing in a Torah, for instance, have been enforced with various degrees of violence. Women in Nida, who are menstruating, are banned from a range of behaviors and activities. Although some women support this and find separation and mikveh restorative, the language in Jewish texts around menstruation and these practices often carry a stigma of shame for women's supposed impurity, and so are very damaging to our psyches. And for women who aren't in heterosexual marriages, the banning of single women from most mikvaot is hurtful and exclusionary, and difficult to understand in what should be a spiritually uplifting experience, and what is explained that way. Yes. Also, the erasure of memory through banning story, sacred texts, images, iconography of female deity, and forbidding practices honoring and celebrating her. Partly this, of course, has been done through banning idolatry. Suppressing memories of crimes committed by ruling or dominator groups, through banning of speech, art, literature, music, symbols, and more. All ways that the feminine has been and continues to be banned, shut out, marginalized. Erasure today through lack of inclusion of many female artists in museums. There are surprisingly and shockingly few women represented. Banning through what speech is allowed or encouraged in hiring practices and workplace decisions made in organizations of every religious tradition through enforced hierarchies, unfair labor practices, subtle or overt discrimination. So the Suppressed Histories Archives, I just want you to know about, and that last piece of art you saw is created by founder Max Dashu, who has been researching and doing this work, has, I think, 40,000 images at least, has been doing this for about 50 years. She offers a slide series, among many others, called Taming the Female Body, in which she talks about, in the name of propriety, modesty, and femininity, women have been bound, confined. And we see this in the covering of hair in Orthodox tradition, the attempt to minimize hearing women's voices in synagogues to protect men from their own sexual impulses, and attempts, which happily have not been altogether successful, to ban both women's voices and our very presence, as I've said, at the kotel. So to launch into these women and these figures, Lilith is the first woman before Eve, made at the same time, and so I'll begin with her. What is she known? What is she banned for? What was she banned for? And still is. Ishtar, a Kadesha, a holy woman, as Max would call her, and yet called whore, and at times cited for her violent aspect as goddess of war over her other qualities. Beruriah, a brilliant and respected Talmudic scholar and sage, who you all know, whose good reputation was ruined, possibly for several centuries, by male-driven suspicions which set her up to fail, and probably jealousy of her achievements by both men and women. So, an image of Lilith. I'll just let you take it in for a moment while I have some water. She's one of the most demonized female figures or archetypes that I know of. Her story represents the treatment of the banned feminine across cultures, because she isn't just this figure talked about in Judaism. Many different religions and cultures have some version of a child-stealing witch or hag or demon. And her origins are here between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, as is Ishtar. And I just wanted you to see Sumer. I'm pointing with my finger, which you can't see. Sumer and Akkad. In Sumer, we have Inanna, and Ishtar hails from Akkad, the Semitic region. So we'll go into that shortly. So who was Lilith? Again, the first woman, Adam's first wife, made from the same bloody clay, as Cozy Fabian called it, made from the same earth or the same primordial soup, as we see on the right in this wonderful image from Lillian Broca. She's also called the first feminist and the first divorcee. I first learned about Lilith in 1985 when I was drawn to a Jewish Institute of Religion class. She's a figure whose voice, even her entire presence, had been silenced, her existence nullified through lack of story. I had never heard of her, and most audiences I speak to, I would say 90% of people have never heard of her still. What I did first learn of her was negative. Her presence had been hidden, suppressed through the teachings I didn't receive in religious school or anywhere else. Learning there was such a fiery, self-authorized figure in Jewish literature was eye-opening, intoxicating, a more than welcome interruption to my then corporate married existence. And I go into much more detail about how she came to me, or I came to her, in one of my first Living Lilith Substack posts. And in fact, Living Lilith is the name of my blog. How else did I learn about her? Through Cozy Fabian Pavalko of blessed memory. I met her first at a women's spirituality festival in the mid-90s. And one of the first things out of her mouth was, "I live Lilith." I had never heard anybody say anything like that. And given what her personality was like, the energy she was putting out, and this statement, I was captivated. We went on to become friends, and I studied with her over a number of years. You will see the link in chat that will be posted now, I hope, by Cindy, and many thanks, so that you can read her Liturgy for Lilith at some point. I didn't want to take time, as much as I love reading it, because I know we don't have much. So Lilith is the first woman in Hebrew mythology, and someone who protests male domination and resists a situation which suffocates her. She's a symbol of resistance who's inspired women to find voice to this day and to stand up for themselves and others. I often run right through past the story because I know it so well and have worked with her for 30 years. So I have to put that note in there to remind me to tell you that she was placed in the garden from the same earth, made from the same earth as Adam, and quickly tired of him telling her what to do, his insistence that she always be in the missionary position, and probably, as Cozy always expressed it, probably just trying to dominate her in every area of their lives. And in fact, Nikki Marmory's book, Lilith, up on the right there, it's a wonderful novel, and you certainly get that same impression from her and how she talks about and through the characters. So Lilith one day decided she'd had enough, not doing this anymore, flew out of the Garden of Eden and went to the Reed or Red Sea to cavort with demons, supposedly, and Cozy used to say, presumably in any position she wished. So Adam was not happy. He complained to God. He wanted her to come back and thought, who's this uppity woman who thinks she can just leave? So God sent 3 angels, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Semangaloth, to bring her back. She refused, and so they started to threaten her, and they said, if you don't return right now, you will have 100 babies who will be demons each night, or, there are many interpretations and translations of this, you will be barren, or you will have demon children. Either she would have the demon children, or 100 of them would die each night. Those are, I think, the most prevalent legends. She still refused, but struck a deal with them. She said, I was sent here to make babies sick, and that is opposite what you may have sometimes heard about her being sent to kill babies. That was not the case in what I know, and of course none of us knows for sure. Haven't spoken with her yet directly. I was sent here to make babies sick, and I won't do that if you have my name on an amulet in their crib or on the pregnant mother's clothing or on an infant's hat. You see many amulets on infants' hats. And this is also throughout the Middle East and not just in our traditions. And so they agreed, and she was left alone. And Adam at that point started complaining again to God about being lonely, and eventually was given Eve, let us say. So Lilith has been demonized, adored, sexualized in modern day pop culture and science fiction to a fare thee well. There is a wonderful midrash by Judith Plaskow from around 1971 or 73 in which Lilith leaves, eventually comes back after Eve has been planted in Eden, and they start to become friends. And Eve starts to come outside the gates, and they start talking, and they have long conversations, and over time became friends and went arm in arm back into the garden to confront Adam after a time. I wanted to also mention the Marmory book, which I have, and amulets and bowls, many of them you may know. The most prevalent languaging in the amulets, which can be done on parchment, on fabric, on all kinds of paper, and certainly clay and silver and gold. Most often say Adam, Eve, out Lilith. The incantation bowl that you see in the upper corner here is a typical example of not a blessing, but not a curse either, but you might call it that, a spell, let us say, asking for a particular family to be protected from her. And in this case, you see, we know it's her. You can't always tell because these figures are kind of stick figures and often could look like a male or female, but you see from the long hair. Anyway, she's often bound by chains so that she will be bound and not bother the inhabitants, for example, of a new house. People would hire somebody, could be a magician, a rabbi, a priestess, sometimes a layperson, to create such a bowl so they would have protection if they're moving into a new home. The bowl would be buried underground or at the doorway, and also if somebody was starting a new business. So, though she was later feared as a demon, in the third millennium, Lilith was viewed as a goddess and as a protector, both by Eleanor Gaydon and Vicky Noble. Vicky and Lucia Birnbaum, also of blessed memory, as is Eleanor Gaydon, see her domination by Adam as possibly the first rape. Lilith left the garden to become free, as I've said. She can serve as a model and catalyst for women to protest male violence and the paradigm that perpetuates and supports it. She's a figure who exists as a disobedient woman, a threat to the social order, a harlot or slut, a child-stealing witch or worse in our literature. In the Talmud, men are warned against Lilith and banned from speaking to her, told they should cross the street if they see or feel her approaching. They're also warned of her as an evil spirit, a demon, or a succubus who can seduce them in their sleep and steal their seed. This was certainly a way of atoning, let's say, or covering for their own possible masturbating practices. One of the best titles of a book I have seen that talks about this is called Rabbinic Fantasies. In contemporary times, some ban the speaking of her name in their homes. And I have heard at least one very interesting story about an Orthodox family who had an amulet against her on their wall. And the dinner guest who I was in a meeting with said that he asked if that's an amulet against Lilith because they were acting like they didn't believe in her. But the minute he uttered her name, they said, shh. They got very upset. So what if we knew Lilith instead as a symbol today, as a figure who was unafraid to take risks, is independent, found and used her voice, declared and lived a life of sovereignty, even at great personal cost, someone whose rage is rightful, arising when needed on behalf of herself or others, not just that it's a blind rage. Also, a wonderful third piece by Lillian Broca, which I imagine is her sneaking out, maybe at night, waving, not speaking to Adam, but just leaving the so-called paradise. She has a series of several images of her contemplating Adam, contemplating leaving, I think, and then a few like that with wings. She inspired my thesis, which became this book, and the creation of Lilith Institute on my website in '97. So on to Ishtar. One of the great challenges, let's say, that I've had, certainly in the beginning of these studies, was, okay, there is an image, that first image I opened up with, which I'll show you again in a moment, of Lilith holding the rod and ring of Sumerian royal authority. I have friends who are sure that is Inanna or Ishtar or Inanna-Ishtar. I was introduced to her as Lilith, and she will always be that for me. So I consulted with one of the committee members for my thesis, and I said, is it possible that she's an aspect? Because we've certainly learned that the goddess has many, as God does, many aspects. And could she be one aspect of Inanna and of Ishtar? And she thought that was perfectly plausible. This was Betty DeShong Metter of blessed memory, who was a feminist Jungian analyst. And I'll leave it at that, except just I have to say that you should look up her work, Meador, because she writes about the high priestess to Inanna, who did the first writing by a woman, by anyone that we have a personal record of, in about 2350 BCE. Ishtar was worshipped by the Semitic peoples of Phoenicia, Syria, and Lebanon, but probably earlier. Exact dates, the website I saw this on said uncertain, but around 2000 BCE. I think it was a bit later, but of course we never know, and we're always kind of, I think, torturing ourselves trying to figure out exact timelines, and yet we do it. It feels important, even though we can't be sure. Ishtar's worship was widespread throughout Mesopotamia, including Babylonia and Assyria, so Iraq, Iran today, in that area. Again, Ishtar was Akkadian. Inanna was her earlier Sumerian counterpart. She was worshipped from about 4000 on. They're often seen as one goddess, Inanna Ishtar, as I've said, arising in different times and locations. So I wanted to include this from Judy Chicago's dinner party, and just give me a second. I want to check my time. I'll let you just take in this delicious image for a moment. And it's not seeing me. Okay, now I guess it's seeing me. Okay, I have to hurry up. Ishtar, called the Queen of Heaven by the people of ancient Mesopotamia. The point I wanted to make from this entry is that Ishtar takes three forms. She's the goddess of love and sexuality, fertility. She's responsible for all life, but she's never a mother goddess. And as the goddess of war, she's often shown winged and bearing arms. Her third aspect is celestial. She's the planet Venus, as is Inanna, the morning and evening star. Statuette of a female nude, known also as the great Babylonian goddess Ishtar. She's in the Louvre. Was there a problem here? For me, there is. Description of her as a female nude is one common example of how female power is undermined. They do add her name as Ishtar, but that should come before female nude, right? That shouldn't be the leading factor, and I think it diminishes her stature and status. What's even worse is when they leave out a goddess's name at all, altogether. And I'm going to just go through a little faster because of time. I wanted to include something from Patai, where he says, and this is one of the ways that we could say she is banned or suppressed or demonized, a certain shift occurred in the balance between the virginal and promiscuous poles of her character. Her virginal aspect underplayed, her promiscuity emphasized to the extent of making her a divine harlot. And we talk about this in terms of trying to figure out, was she a sacred prostitute? Did she do cultic or ritual prostitution? And that's a whole other class, so I won't go further into that. She was, again, associated with these various aspects of life and known for her strength and power, often referred to, as Inanna was, as the Queen of Heaven in the Mesopotamian pantheon. And yet the essence and power of these and other female deities is suppressed, as I've said, in museum and other descriptions of their forms, not just as naked figures, but as dolls, fertility figures, toys sometimes, and even being viewed as being pornographic. This woman at the window is one of a very famous scene in Phoenician ivory carving. There are at least two of these in the Nimrud carvings. And shows a woman who looks out of a window. You've already seen one of those, thought to be a sacred prostitute linked to Astarte or Ishtar, two aspects of the same deity, 9th to 7th centuries, again from the Iraq area. And I found out that there were double versions found, the British Museum says, of this image, which explained to me why this image is so much cleaner and better preserved, it looks like, than the other piece we just saw. But I knew they wouldn't have tried to mess with it, to clean it up in a certain way. So there are at least two of them. So how can we cast these aspersions aside? I think through poetry, among other things. And Cindy, if you would please put that in chat, Kadesha, Sacred Whore. For me, that's Cozy's title. I call this a way of unbanning Ishtar. So all these figures, Inanna, Ishtar, Lilith, have primary symbols that are similar: the owl, star, and lion. The star not so much for Lilith, who is the figure on the bottom left, my left anyway. She's associated also with the underworld, prophecy, and medicine. It feels important to bring in Asherah's treatment in Torah here, since we're talking about banning, and this is one of the most active illustrations of banning of the feminine in Jewish tradition for me. In talking about Asherah, who had lived in some way, in some form, in synagogues for, I think, at least about 200 to 300 years, when King Josiah came into power, and at other points, there were these statements in Torah. Exodus would have probably been before him, but you'll see what I mean. Rather, you must shatter their altars, break down their monuments, and cut down their Asherah trees. The monuments, or the pillars referred to below, probably mean the Asherah poles. You must tear down their altars, smash their pillars, and cut down their sacred posts used in worship of the goddess. And they knew she was being worshipped on the hillsides, and that there were altars on the hillsides, and that was what one might call folk religion. And so, of course, it was not only forbidden, it was a great threat to the prevailing paradigm, let's say. It's especially acute in kings. The king ordered the high priest Hilkiah, the priests of the second rank, and the guards of the threshold, all those people, to bring out of the temple of God all the objects made for Baal and Asherah and all the host. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron and removed the ashes to Bethel. So I just want to say that one of the other quotes that I didn't find for tonight, but that I read that upset me so much, and still does, is that the vitriol is so evident, the fear, the hatred, whatever it was, that not only were they ordered to take any sign of her out of the temple and grind up the poles, let's say, or any representation of her, which I think sometimes were simply woven. They were called batim. We don't really know what they were, but it may have been just fabric that's hanging on the wall, or a little spirit house. Grind it up, and then in one case go up to the hillside to a cemetery and strew the ashes over the graves. You have to really hate something to do that, yeah? And to try to wipe out any memory of the belief. This is what you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, that of course is similar, cut down their sacred posts, and consign their images to the fire. So a lot of this preparation of this particular PowerPoint made me really sad. It really hit home, probably because the topic of banning and loss of women's rights is so acute right now. And so I wanted to include a bit of the beauty of her. And I think that this particular image, which we recently saw in a redwood grove, looks like it could be a figure. And it could certainly serve, I think, as an Asherah pole. There is this beautiful piece called the Tree of Life Goddess. You see eyes here, found about 7,500 years ago in Neve Yam by the Israel Antiquities Authority. Now it's in a museum. Asherah in the Hecht Museum in Haifa, and an Asherah pole, I think it could be, the way he refers to some of his work, by a contemporary artist, David Haas-Tetler. So I think I may have at the most 5 more minutes, so I'm going to kind of race because I want time for questions. I want to allow time. So from the biblical references, it appears that Asherah is referred to in these different manifestations I've mentioned. Biblical Archaeology Digest, story by Ruth Hestrin, goes into further detail. And again, we have a problem with the descriptions. Judean pillar figurine found in Lachish, rather than naming her throughout, not just here on World History Encyclopedia online, but at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Equally annoying for me is the description later used on their website. This buxom goddess figurine with pillar base is nude and supports her breasts in her hands. So it's all about sexualizing a deity, and no explanation is given as to why she's holding her breasts. a posture seen both in goddess figures and worshippers, indicating fecundity, abundance, and that something sacred is going on. Asherah, we have, oh yes, was either a goddess or a cultic object, it said on one website. And I'm thinking, how would you not know the difference between, based on its practice, whether something is a goddess or a cult object? And also the end of this quote, a verse which seems to indicate that Asherah was at least sometimes considered to be a deity. How do you only sometimes consider a god a god? And how could such beauty be banned? This from one website I thought was beautiful, a conception of what an Asherah pole might have looked like in ancient times. And another work by David Hostetler. So I want to quickly move on to the flesh and blood, Talmudic sage Beruriah. We know that she was brilliant, 2nd century, a brilliant scholar, admired and greatly respected during much of her life, even though her family, many of them had been murdered or sold into slavery. She'd lost several children. And of course, she lived in an era where few women were literate, much less fluent in the intricacies of religious law. But she was an astute legal expert, and rabbis consulted her and took her authority on laws of purity and other issues. No doubt, though, her scholarship and keen intelligence threatened men as well as other women. Eventually, even if she wasn't banned or ostracized by her community, her reputation was ruined, and she was discounted for being emotionally unstable. Her legacy endured accusations by commentators over several centuries of unfaithfulness as proof of flightiness of women. She was so ashamed, and no doubt shamed, for committing adultery into which she was seduced, a setup done by her husband, possibly to test her faith, Rabbi Meir, so ashamed that she committed suicide. I would like to know if we can, instead of remembering those pieces that were negative, if we can honor her, and I think in many cases that is true today, that she is honored for her intelligence and determination, but perhaps for several centuries she suffered, her reputation suffered. Can we remember her for her accomplishments and see her story as important for all she overcame, and at the end, tragic and not shameful? I want to mention another woman, but I will have to leave it for the recording, artist Helene Elan, whose work would have been banned for overthrowing taboos, which she did because she couldn't touch her husband because she was menstruating when he was dying of cancer. And it so upset her, needless to say, it changed the direction of her life, and she went on to do some very radical art, such as this, The Liberation of God, in which she critiques the Bible without actually defacing it. So we won't have time for the drumming, but some closing questions to ponder and next steps we can take. And perhaps I will save that and offer space and time for Q&A first, and I can then bring that in. So any questions? I'll start there. Yes, Rita.
Thank you for this beautiful combination of heart and scholarship. Brilliant, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I noticed, I think the images went very quickly, but in that that statue from the Louvre, where I'm pretty sure that figure not only had no indication of genitalia, but
Right.
no nipples,
Right.
and strange cartoonish eyes, but she had no mouth.
Right.
And I also noticed
Thank
that
you.
same thing in the woman in the window, I think also, I'm not sure. I mean, the stone had been eroded somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that Hello Kitty, who I like, even though I'm afraid of cats, I'm a dog person, she has no mouth either. And what a terrific way to silence a woman, to just no mouth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would you agree that figure?
Yes, and it's not, she's not alone, let's just say. Yeah.
Anyway, just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Rita. Reba.
Thank you so much. I don't remember her name, but I'm also remembering another Talmud story about a woman who there's some discussion about whether she can make the the lunch kiddush blessing or not, and she gets so angry that she goes and like breaks all these vats of wine. So I'm just want to like lift her up to that like sacred rage. And I'm curious from your scholarship, like what connections you see between the goddess Astarte and Queen Esther and the holiday of Easter. I've heard there's some connection, but I don't have the understanding of depth that you do.
I haven't been able to research that enough, but I will just say that yes, they definitely think there are connections, especially from Ishtar to Esther, and and also it's interesting if you trace the outfits or the garb that these deities are wearing. There's often that serpentine crown or a tall hat, and I think I've seen some images of Esther that way as well. So yes, I mean, so much of this is conjecture, and yet the more you research it, the more strings and threads you find that are connected. But I can't say more than that about Esther, except yes, we definitely think there's a connection, a development, let's say, of, does that mean that she's a goddess? Does it mean she has some of the same qualities? Who knows? It's for everybody needs to decide that probably for themselves, but it's a good question. Thank you.
No,
I'm
thank
just
you.
trying to look at, oh, thank you, Lilith. Yes, I love that. Lilith Returns, your book. Many thanks for that.
Yeah. So
Yes.
my poem about her is that I wrote this in 1989 when she came to me in a vision. I was at a women's camp. Lilith returns, sleeping out under the tall pines. I realize my name is Lilith. Dreaming, I cross over the low fence surrounding the white man's dilapidated house and begin plucking from the trees the ripe peaches, plums, and apricots that he's allowing to fall and rot on the ground. That's my fruit, he howls as I sate my great hunger. That's mine. The fruits of the earth belong to us all, I calmly reply. The hoarding time is over. I am Lilith, the serpent's ally, lesbian, woman, virgin, Jew, she who reclaims the name, the fruit, the knowledge for us all.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
That was a turning point in my life for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Joanne, yes, to your question, could you imagine describing men in such a sexual way? Of course not. And of course, the things that Lilith and all of these strong female deities are criticized for are lauded, and greatly praised when they show up in men, right? Like aggressiveness or being a self-starter or taking your own life, your own decisions in your hands are read completely differently when women are doing those things than when men are doing them, right?
Oh,
Reva. Oh, Reva,
Reva.
Yalta, that's who you were talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
Reva. I didn't know about Yalta. Huh.
And thank you, Tish, in 78 for a class taught by Rabbi Sandy Lowe. You wrote a midrash about Lilith, and later rewrote as a 400-word piece for the annual publication of the Sitting Room in Katati. That's wonderful. Are you able to share that with us at some point or in some way?
Oh, I don't know where,
Yeah, I know.
I
I know.
I live in Washington State now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that often does happen.
It is.
Okay, thank you. All right, I just thought I'd ask.
Together all my writing, and I've been writing since I was 10 and I'm 85. So I've got a lot of paperwork to sort through.
Right, I get it. Okay, thank you.
This was actually about Lilith, and it was Adama and her two daughters, of which one
Uh-huh.
it was about a lesbian relationship they had, and they just told Adam to get lost.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think I have time to go back to the last slides I didn't get to, right? Barbara? I can't hear you. You're muted still. I think we have, 10 minutes?
Go ahead.
No, we have till 8:20-ish or 8:25.
Okay,
and
great.
8:18 now. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. So some questions to consider. Whoops. It's just a few things. Yes, but important. Closing questions for you to ponder, or you can make a note of to ponder later, and next steps we can take. What if we learned about Lilith as a woman unafraid to use her voice, to express her anger, because we swallow it so often, too often, to define and celebrate her sexuality, to leave a situation that wasn't in her best interests? What if we understood Ishtar to be a holy woman, a goddess, a priestess, not a sacred prostitute or whore? Of course, the definition in those times and in these times is quite different. A holy whore could be something that might have been respected then if she had certain cultic functions, but it's certainly not today. What if we saw Beruriah, as I said, only for her intelligence, deep wisdom, and determination to make it and to do her work against all odds? One of the things we can do is surround ourselves with beautiful images, with important writings and teachings. Restoring women to cultural memory is really the goal of Max and her Suppressed Histories archives. And I think it certainly is mine and the work of many others I know, Judy Grahn certainly, and many probably in this room. And what we can do to break some of the patterns of this paradigm, again, we can immerse ourselves in teachings, art, and images which remind us of women's contributions that have been lost in every field in history. We need to let our children and everyone we interact with know it wasn't always like this. There was a time of more egalitarian living before patriarchy, and people don't realize that. Increasing our knowledge and awareness by staying in conversation with friends, colleagues, and in groups about the treatment of girls and women can help us deconstruct the patriarchal paradigm and keep the sacred feminine alive in all of us. And we can write and speak praises, as in this liturgy, which I can share in a different way another time because we don't have time. But it's been wonderful to talk with you, and many thanks.
Thank you. And I just want to point out that I just noticed that it's old women that joined you, Lilith talk, and all.
No, we have somebody who I think is
men.
named Tom, and somebody who was with Cynthia,
Okay.
and that's why
I
said
am here.
Oh, hi, Tom. Sorry.
Good. No, that's important. It's why I also said the sacred feminine being alive in all of us, because we all have sacred feminine and sacred masculine inside of us.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Let me do a little tour guiding because we're going to be doing a comparable division for the next session. And just to let you know that Basha Hirschfeld and Reb Judith Goldman, whose background is Jewish, but also for Barbara, Buddhist, will be speaking about waking up sparks of holiness and how being banned can wake up the holy sparks of courage. And I'm assuming that's probably in room number 1, but we'll have to check when we get that option. And then Elaine Ellenson is going to be speaking about Esther Kreitman, the sister of Isaac Bashevis Singer, and who was thought to be the model for Yentl. And Elaine shared some of this really delicious work. She's a gifted writer and a very different perspective than her more well-known brothers. And I'm just delighted to see that name available to us in a way that we didn't have it. She was just the unknown sister. Again, that silencing. And the folks in the other room are done. So if it's okay with everybody, we can, Cindy, you can assist us in getting back so that we can make choices about our next session. And really, most importantly, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. D'vorah, we are all in your debt for this amazing scholarship and the way you so graciously shared it with us tonight. And I know there's more we can do, and we can talk about how we might share some more of it through our lifelong learning process.
Thank you. Thank you again, Barbara.